Welcome to the conference. This is AMI Inside.
It's 8:45 a.m. in downtown Toronto, and TELUS Digital has welcomed over 400 people inside their Ontario headquarters.
My name is Billy Gregory. This is my colleague, Oscar Weston. We are only 2 of the 7 people that put this conference on. This is a really special day. It marks a very important day on the calendar. It's the day I officially stopped bugging all of you about a11yTO Conf on Twitter for at least 363 days.
This is the second annual a11yTO conference, and the focus is digital accessibility. Co-organizer Billy Gregory.
Last year was incredible. We didn't know what to expect. We didn't know if the city would take to it. We didn't know if people would come. We had this great turnout, a lot of people. This year, again, we didn't know what to expect, and then all of a sudden, we had way more than the year before. We wanted to have a conference that almost all stakeholders could show up, but I would say the primary focus would probably be design and development, but definitely anybody that has sort of any physical stake in digital accessibility is here. I mean, the city has rallied behind this and created this amazing thing. And this year we've had people from Vienna, from Austria, from Japan, all over the UK, all over the US, all over Canada, and it's really becoming a destination conference.
Shell Little traveled from Seattle, Washington to speak at the conference.
So for me, I went to college for accessibility, and I trained and learned up and studied accessibility and graduated from school and then started working. And the people who are here today, we've got Steve Faulkner here, some people from TPG, Leonie Watson. These are the people who started accessibility, and to be able to learn from them, in person is really exciting.
Before the conference got underway, Billy honored the late Robert Pearson, AMI's accessibility officer. Globally recognized for his leadership and advocacy, Robert was passionate about making media accessible for everyone.
We lost Rob in December of 2015, suddenly. Rob had this history in our community of being this supporter. He was always there for us. He did a lot to sort of grow us, and honestly, we wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for him. Rob had this habit of leaving pennies wherever he went in the world. He would go and he would hide a penny somewhere, so someone would find this penny and know that someone had been there. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to leave this at the front of the stage because I don't want to hide Rob. I want Rob to see and be front and center for all of us for the next 2 days. So Rob, buddy, this one's for you. Everyone, do this for Rob, all right?
Shell Little is an accessibility specialist at Wells Fargo.
I'm Shell, and I have ADHD. I have a learning disability. It's not something that I say. I don't really say it at work. It's a little bit scary to tell people. There's a lot of misinformation out there. So to be here today to say that with you guys, this is a really big deal for me. So I think that you guys are woke. Thank you. It's exciting and creative in a new space because, we're starting to be able to have conversations about people with cognitive disabilities, where you'd see me walking on the street, and because I have an invisible disability, you would have no idea that I bang my face against my keyboard, hitting barriers every day at work and in my everyday life. And I constantly throw my phone. We have these hidden lives that, we're starting to talk about more and more. So I have ADHD, but I also have dyslexia. I also have dysgraphia, and I also have dyscalculia. So they come in groups. They hang out as friends. But in general, you could sum it up by saying, I'm neurodivergent. I'm different than everybody else. Neurodivergent means having a brain that functions in a way that diverges significantly from the dominant societal standard of normal. So normal is relative, but there is, statistics. It's just my brain works different, and that's totally cool, and it's a huge part of who I am as a person. So what does it mean to have all those big words on the screen? So basically, spelling, not a thing. Totally not. Focus, super difficult for me. Numbers are nonsense. I'm going to say that again. Numbers are nonsense. They can be pretty much meaningless to people who have dyscalculia. But on the positive, I have a wicked memory. I'm able to parse problems in a way that other people can't. I can look at many, many moving parts and red flag things, and they hold a space in my brain, and I can see them in my mind. I've got superpowers, and then I've got stuff that kind of holds me back. A lot of people we think about in boxes. So someone who's blind, they use screen readers. Someone who's hard of hearing, they use captions. Somebody who has limited mobility, they use voice to text. Someone who's neurodivergent, oh, they just need special fonts. That's it. And if I make this, I'm good to go. It's not how it works. So for instance, for someone who's neurodivergent, spoilers, they use all of those things. So if you're thinking about people who use screen readers who are only blind, you're doing a disservice to a whole group of people. If you're thinking about captions only for people who are hard of hearing or deaf, you are doing a disservice to a huge group of people. So the first thing we're going to talk about, moving content. When I'm talking about moving content in general, I'm talking about things that move and don't stop, or things that jump out at you. So for someone who's not neurodivergent, we would call them neurotypical, having a chatbot that runs across the screen and says, yo, I'm here, I can help you, super helpful. You're like, oh, I don't really need that right now. For someone like me, or someone with an attention-related disability, oh my God, that's a huge barrier. That's game over. You could forget exactly what you were doing, and it's done. And your task is broken, and you're done. We also have moving things like pop-ups, like sign up. Oh my God, you're on my mommy blog, I love you. I want to share all my info with you, sign up. And I'm like, whoa, like I just want your crock pot recipe, like get out of my face. So when we're talking about moving things, we're talking about things that we're creating and we're thinking it's helpful and useful to certain user groups, but we're creating these barriers for other user groups. Moving on, next we're going to talk about displaying passwords. This is a new trend, and it makes me very happy. When it comes to passwords, it's very difficult. A lot of people have a hard time when you've got ... What does that mean? I don't know. People aren't looking over your shoulder anymore to try to steal your password. It's not 2001. So having these things where you're able to uncheck and see what you're typing is really important. And there's a lot of your users who, when they go to sign into your website, or if they go to sign up for your product, they want that feature really bad. Because when you're asking them to try to make a password that is not their birth date, and then it has to have 4 numbers and 6 characters, and then it has to have a phase of the moon in it, and then it has to match its other thing. It's a lot to ask a user to do. And so when they get that amazing password that matches the phase of the moon and has all the numbers, you ask them to match it, and they can't see what they just typed. That sucks. That's really hard. So by having it where we reveal our passwords, it's a really big deal. So in conclusion, any exchange of information from you to your users, if you're making it better for everybody, it's likely it's something that's make or break for somebody who is neurodivergent in some way or another.
Coming up next on AMI Inside.
In Ontario, one of the lessons we've learned is that passing a law is one thing, getting it effectively implemented is another.
AMI Inside will return. This is AMI Inside.
Welcome back to AMI Inside.
It's usually rude to take your smartphones out in the middle of a talk. I'm going to invite you to. Not to check with your bookie on how much you've lost on the horse races, though you can. Follow at David Lepofsky, DavidLepofsky, and retweet our tweets.
David Lepofsky is chair of the AODA Alliance, a nonpartisan advocacy group that monitors the progress of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act.
We are busy tweeting every member of the House of Commons in Ottawa, and where we can, every member of the Ontario legislature on the issues I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. Just clicking retweet whenever you can helps our cause. So what's going on? Well, the wave of legislation, of passing and then demanding the effective implementation of legislation to achieve equality for people with disabilities is a wave that is sweeping around the world. I'm just a bit player in it, but I've gotten to see it from different perspectives, and it's just amazing. Last summer, when I spoke in Israel at the conference to honor the 20th anniversary of their national accessibility legislation, Now, you may have noticed Israel's got a few other issues on their plate, internally and externally, to struggle with. They have more people hired to inspect accessibility for their government in tiny little Israel than we have in the entire province of Ontario. Go figure. I'll be leaving in a couple of weeks for New Zealand, where folks with disabilities are rallying to get their new national government to keep its commitment to enact New Zealand national accessibility legislation. What's really cool is last year in New Zealand, I'm tweeting from Auckland about the training for their activists, and we're getting retweets from barrier-free Manitoba in Winnipeg cheering them on. It's a wave that's spreading everywhere, and organizations that do business and governments that serve the public have two choices: get ahead of the wave or get swamped. So what's going on in Canada? Briefly, let me tell you what's going on provincially and then federally. Provincially, as you've heard, we have accessibility law in Ontario passed in 2005. I had the privilege of leading the campaign for that, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. How's it doing? It's a good law, but the implementation over the past several years has been pretty weak. In Ontario, one of the lessons we've learned is that passing a law is one thing, getting it effectively implemented is another. We had a new government elected in June in Ontario. We're nonpartisan. We'll work with any government. We'll work with any opposition party. The problem that we've experienced most immediately, and where you can lend your voice to ours or add your voice to ours, is that we had accessibility advisory committees publicly appointed to develop advice for how to strengthen our employment accessibility standard, our information and communication accessibility standard, and to develop recommendations for education accessibility standard and a healthcare accessibility standard that the previous government had promised us. These were all committees up, running, and busy working until the middle of June. After the election was decided, the public service froze all their work. Froze it all, pending briefing the new government. Well, the new government, to their credit, has a full-time minister for accessibility and seniors. How long does it take to brief a new minister when it's their full-time job? Well, here we are 115 days later, and no end to that freeze has been announced. We're tweeting on it. Please retweet our tweets.
Lepofsky gave his thoughts on Bill C-81, the country's first proposed national accessibility legislation.
The bill is called the Accessible Canada Act. It's a good start, but it's a weak bill. It gives the federal government a bunch of powers to promote accessibility, but doesn't set any timelines or obligations to ever use those powers. We're calling on the federal government to set an end date, just like the Ontario legislation does, by which we are to all achieve full accessibility. That would equip you, because you could turn to obligated organizations and say, hey, you got to be fully accessible in your IT by this date. Let's talk about a plan to get us there. If there's no end date, there's less pressure for action. The next problem we've seen with this legislation is good that they want effective enforcement and that they've created new enforcement powers and a new National Accessibility Commissioner. That's all good. But they've splintered the power to make access standards and the power to enforce them among 3 or 4 different national agencies. Now, I'm a lawyer. I'm now a law professor. I teach in this area. And I think if anybody ought to be able to figure it out, I hope it would be me. I read this bill and I get a headache. Just trying to figure out who makes what, where you go to complain about what. It's a formula for confusion, and that only serves the interests of organizations who don't want to face new standards and new enforcement.
The next speaker was Melissa Banyard, a design researcher at the Canadian Digital Service.
My general goal moving forward is to make research alongside users with disabilities the new norm in design. It's typical now to use what some might call a minimum compliance approach. And that minimum compliance approach is basically using baseline accessibility standards as your only method for designing accessibly. That might mean that you're using WCAG compliance and you're maybe running audits on something to see where your site fits into that. But this isn't always enough. At CDS, this happened shortly before I arrived. The team sent a site in for an audit, and the site actually passed with an 88%, which I think is pretty good. But when they actually tested it in person with a visually impaired individual, that man said, "I can't really say it's broken or inaccessible, but you wouldn't really be able to take it to court for me." I'm calling for a move past the minimum. Accessibility standards, audits, labs, they're all awesome methods, and they're really quick, efficient, and rigorous. But meeting with real users is going to give us that second layer.
Banyard shared what she has learned from working with nonverbal kids.
This is a photo of me sitting in a workshop at York University with a young boy around 10 years of age who had cerebral palsy, and his mom and brother and sister. And I was interviewing the mother, and I asked her, in what ways do you manage your child's negative behavior? I was very proud of this question. And she looked at me up and down, and she laughed a little bit awkwardly. I could tell she was slightly offended, and she took a minute to answer, and then she said, "What do you mean by negative behaviors? He has none. He's just a little kid." I kind of fumbled for an answer and then tried to shift the interview from there. But in hindsight, we need to know that we will make mistakes. This subtle moment was a turning point for me, and it illuminated the limits of my understanding as an able-bodied researcher of disability. In leaning into this moment, so I apologized profusely and asked about her style of parenting in general, I was able to question how my own experience might influence the questions I ask in an interview. The real learning happens when able-bodied designers and developers stop pretending to be experts on disability. If you're an able-bodied person interested in user research with people with disabilities, it's really important that you know yourself. You need to consider, what could I be wrong about? What do I even know about disability? And even more importantly, where did this information come from? What did I learn about disability in school growing up, from my parents, culturally, from media? These are all things that we carry with us in our research. The second child who came in to do this workshop was a 14-year-old boy with autism, and his session was much quieter, full of what I kind of assumed to be disinterested, disengaged body language. In this bottom photo, I'm speaking with his mom, and he's sitting between us, kind of leaning back. He's on his phone listening to videos. Oh, also on top of that, the technology didn't work. And so I left feeling pretty crappy about myself. But actually, when I interviewed the mom a couple days later, she said that her son had been playing with the talk box nonstop, had taken the instructions I'd given him and had taken it apart and put it back together multiple times, and that she hadn't stopped hearing it yammer in the background. So this makes me think, how does my definition of success limit someone's opportunities to be successful in a workshop? In this case, my limiting definition of success in this workshop kept me from seeing alternative means of participation from this nonverbal child. I missed what they were doing by looking at what they weren't doing. I think we just have to look at kind of general methods of engagement and reevaluate how we're reacting to those methods. We need to be cognizant of things like eye contact. Just because someone isn't making eye contact with you or can't make eye contact with you doesn't mean they're disinterested. And the same goes with any kind of verbal feedback. Someone could still be listening, and you should take anything they say and hold quite value in it.
Coming up next on AMI Inside.
Because what games actually represent is access to recreation, to culture, to socializing. Those are the kind of things that can be the difference between existing and living.
AMI Inside will return. This is AMI Inside.
Welcome back to the conference.
Every major gaming platform, so that's Nintendo Switch, the Xbox, the PlayStation, the iOS, Android PC, every single gaming platform now has at least some degree of platform-level accessibility support. That's never happened before.
Ian Hamilton is an independent game accessibility specialist.
First off, this question, why games? Because that's something that I still see asked a lot in the broader accessibility community. You know, why are you thinking about some meaningless distraction like playing games? You know, when we've got these other big issues to solve about people's ability just to be able to get through life. They're a huge cultural phenomenon. You know, when something like a Call of Duty or something like a FIFA comes out, it's everywhere. It's all over the billboards, the newspapers, the TV ads. It's what all your friends are talking about. It's what all your friends are doing, which makes it a really, really big deal to be excluded from. But on the other hand, it also means that games are a really, really powerful tool for inclusion in society. Because what games actually represent is access to recreation, to culture, to socializing. Those are the kind of things that can be the difference between existing and living. And if for any reason your means of accessing those things in day-to-day life is restricted, then games can become a really powerful way of accessing that. So it's no exaggeration at all to say that games can really profoundly change people's lives.
The accessibility features within games have grown significantly over the past year.
This is from a charity in the UK called Special Effect, who build people custom hardware setups, people who can't use regular controllers. And they've now branched out into software. So they've released an add-on for Minecraft, which basically puts a palette of controls along the bottom of the screen that can then be accessed via eye gaze. So this add-on allows you to play Minecraft just using your eyes. And this was actually built solely by this person here, who's Kirsty McNaught, by a single developer. And that's traditionally where a lot of the innovation has come from in accessibility in games. This is a game called Flat Heroes, which was made by one person. They're tweeting about a bunch of nice accessibility features they've got. They've got customizable color palettes so people are colorblind. You can freely configure all the buttons any way you want. You can turn off screen shake for simulation sickness. You can turn off the vibration in the controller, which is really good for RSI and also some sensory processing issues as well. One last example from the little guys. This is a game called Infernium. They got a bunch of nice accessibility stuff in there. You can turn off enemies. You can adjust their speeds. You can increase your tutorials. This was patched in. So they released an accessibility patch 2 weeks after the game was launched. And the game sold as many copies in the 2 days after that patch that it sold in the 2 weeks previously. But the last year in particular, it hasn't just been about those little studios. There's been a lot of movement at the opposite end of the industry. Those big, like, tens, hundreds of $1 million budget games. This is a really nice example. This is from Madden. Madden's been updated to be accessible to people who are completely blind. And they've done this through haptics. So basically, a lot of the game is already kind of accessible because you have a commentator describing everything that happens in the game. What's difficult is the stuff that's going on with the UI. So knowing like how to pass and how to kick and all that kind of stuff. And basically added in vibrations. So when you have like a kick meter going up and down the screen, you're supposed to hit it at the point you want when it's at the right strength. There's just a different level of vibration for how up and down the meter is. And the reason why it's vibration, normally you kind of do this kind of stuff through audio. The reason it's through vibration was because the developer who put it in, she's actually got hearing loss herself. So she can't actually test the audio cues very well. So she put it in for her own testing purposes, doing it through haptics. But it's worked really, really well, and it's had really nice reception from the blind community. God of War, another huge, huge game. It's got slightly different kind of options here. These options that are about simplifying some of the complex interactions. So things where, for example, you have to like hammer a button really quickly to do it, you can replace that with just having to hold it down instead. Also, finally, customizable subtitles as well. That's a real, real bugbear in games for a lot of people, is having tiny, unreadable subtitles. So to see actually the options starting to come in there to increase the visibility of them has been really lovely to see. Spider-Man. Another game with a bunch of nice accessibility settings. It's got some stuff relating to the UI in this as well. So you can turn off parallaxing. You can also turn off the transparency of the UI, as well as the same kind of things we're talking about, like configuring the subtitle presentation, being able to simplify those interactions. And it's really, really important that these big games are doing it, because as lovely as the small games are, and as much as they're pushing the innovation side of it forward, it's when a game like Spider-Man does this kind of stuff that the whole industry pays attention. And it's really important just in the gaming community as well. These are the kind of games that help raise awareness and change attitudes towards accessibility and disability.
The a11yTO conference is becoming an epicenter for digital accessibility training. To take up the call for action, follow hashtag a11yTO.
We didn't realize what the momentum would be like from year to year. We were hoping it was something we could continue, and it definitely is. We're getting actually ready to announce year 3. When people come to our conference, they leave not only with a new tool set, but with a new group of friends, new group of contacts, colleagues, potential, job opportunities, and memories.
In remembrance of Robert Pearson, 1976 to 2015. Producers: Randy Urban, Christian Urban. Videographer: Danny Patterson. Editors: Randy Urban, Christian Urban, Mariam Bakhtiar. Narrator: Melissa Keith. Post-sound mixer: John Bartal. Integrated described video specialist: Ron Rickford. Special thanks, #a11yTO, TELUS Digital, Billy Gregory, Oscar Weston, Shell Little, David Lepofsky, Melissa Banyard, Ian Hamilton. Created by Rebecca Ellison, Kelly McDonald. Graphics: Mike Smith. Production supervisor: Janice Civitilli. Director, production: Kara Nye. Director, programming: Brian Perdue. Vice President, Programming and Production: John Melville. President and CEO: David Arrington. Copyright 2018, Accessible Media Incorporated.